Hello, welcome. This is your host, Montgomery Norton, with astrocosmology. We are talking about the current monthly transits for November. In the previous video, I talked about the retrograde planets and the major configurations. Now, when we dive into the transits that are happening, a lot of these are involved in those major configurations. So I'll just kind of briefly mention them, but not spend too much time. So the first one on November 1st was Venus opposite Chiron. This was at 24 degrees of Libra for Venus and 24 degrees of Aries for Chiron. And this was involved in the T square. So the universal principle of the feminine, basically around fairness and beautiful balance, is opposed by the healing of the wounded masculine warrior. And I already talked about this a little bit in the grand configurations with regard to the T square. So then on November 2nd, 3:16 p.m., Venus and Chiron, opposite Chiron, as I just said, are both square Jupiter, and that forms the T square officially, or exactly at 25 degrees 1 minute of Libra Chiron Libra Aries for Venus and Chiron, and then Jupiter is in Cancer, finishing that T square. So the Venus Chiron opposition are both square the social benefit and the principles of social inclusion. November 3rd, 7:59 p.m., so basically 8 p.m. Mars is trining Neptune at 29 degrees 43 minutes of Scorpio for Mars and 29 degrees 43 minutes of Pisces for Neptune. Neptune will be retrograde, and this is involved in that cradle major configuration that I explained. So the masculine deep dive into the underworld is working with Neptune's revisiting the last degree of Pisces. So it's a completion of how the masculine can help the spiritual aspects of karma and mystical illusion or delusion for all of us internally. Then on November 4th, 5:01 a.m., Mars enters Sagittarius, which it will stay until December 16th. And Mars surfaces from Scorpio to explore the outer world of philosophy, travel, culture, and experience. The pursuit of growth and experience is now where the collective masculine is going to focus. Also on November 4th at 9:30 a.m., Mars at 0 degrees 7 minutes of Sagittarius is opposite Uranus at 0 degrees 8 minutes of Gemini in retrograde. Uranus will be in retrograde. And this is also that cradle major configuration. Newly in its exploration of the masculine, in its exploration, the masculine is confronted by Uranus's interlude in the first degree of Gemini since July. This is a moment of exploring how the higher mind can and will elevate the masculine's journey of belief systems. November 5th, 5:20 a.m., there is a full moon at 13 degrees 22 minutes of Taurus. This is basically big grounding is in order as we feel the fullness into our bodies in the physical plane of existence. This is also an opportunity to indulge in the senses and feel into the nourishing beauty of nature. It's also a great exploration into resources, money, and feeling into what that means in our lives and what's our relationship to money. Then November 6th, 7:10 a.m., Mars at 1 degree 29 minutes of Sagittarius sextiles Pluto. And this is involved in that cradle major configuration as well. But it is explained simply as immediately after working with Neptune, spiritual and mystical endeavors, and opposing Uranus, the higher mind of intuition and electric radical change, the masculine gets to experience the depths of the underworld and the new levels of transformation that is occurring in society. Also, November 6th, there's 3 more transits happening. At 2:40 p.m., Venus enters Scorpio. So the collective feminine is moving into the waters of the deep, intuitive power and resources. This is another opportunity to get to the bottom of manipulation and the power struggles in society, kind of the dark power plays that are at hand. Also, November 6th, 9:12 p.m., Jupiter at 25 degrees of Cancer, is trine Lilith, and this is part of the grand trine. It's also involved in several of the other configurations, like the kites. This is when the benefit of society and sensitive human dynamic relationships helps to empower the repressed feminine and liberate women from the oppressive power struggles. Lastly, on November 6th at 9:43 p.m., the Sun at 15 degrees of Scorpio trines the North Node at 15 degrees of Pisces. So this is involved in one of the other grand configurations as well. At the same time as everything else happening on November 6th, our collective awareness is looking into the depths of control and is supporting our evolution of karma. November 7th, 6:19 p.m., Uranus retrogrades back into Taurus. So moving back into Taurus, where it has been since 2018, this is radically reshaping our relationship with stability, resources, money, and the planet, the Earth itself. Also on November 7th, 7:43 p.m., Venus at 1 degree 30 minutes of Scorpio squares Pluto at 1 degree 30 minutes of Aquarius. Of course, as Venus makes her descent into the underworld, she gets immediately greeted by a conflict with the ruler of Scorpio, death, transformation, and destruction. Basically, the collective feminine gets to see into the dark underbelly of society's manipulation and power dynamics. November 9th, 11:01 a.m., Mercury goes retrograde. I talked about this in the previous video. Basically, our minds are going to be exploring the deeper meaning of life's philosophy, culture, and travel as it gets to turn around to revisit these first 7 degrees, going all the way back to the last 10 degrees of Scorpio. Going back through the last 10 degrees of Scorpio back to 20. And so our minds get to get a last visit of the dark underworld secrets and how our belief systems are influenced by such. November 9th as well, 6:55 p.m., Saturn retrograde, 25 degrees of Pisces, trine to Lilith at 25 degrees of Scorpio, and this is involved in that grand trine as well as one or two of the kites, maybe all 3 of them. So in addition to the Jupiter Lilith trine, this grand trine also includes Saturn retrograde. So both the social expansion and social contraction, both aspects of society are working with Lilith and Scorpio to empower the feminine experience. November 11th, 8:41 a.m., Jupiter goes retrograde. Again, talked about it in the other video. Basically, our social and emotional explanation turns inward. It is time to feel our social abundance and the gifts, generosity of our friends and social network, but more internally. November 12th, Mercury retrograde conjuncts Mars 6 degrees of Sagittarius. So the exploration that our minds have been embarking on comes into contact with the collective masculine that has been investigating and taking action on our belief systems. Because Mercury is retrograde, we should be experiencing this convergence more internally rather than out in the world. November 16th, 9:07 p.m. Sun 25 degrees of Scorpio trines Jupiter retrograde at 25 degrees Cancer. Again, part of the grand water trine, also several, if not all, the kites. And the trine between Jupiter and Saturn is coming into contact with many other planets, including Mercury and now the Sun. In this instance, our awareness expands into our emotional experience of our social world. So these are grand water trines. It's how do we feel what society is actually doing? What do we feel about it? How does it affect us emotionally? I'm sure you could think about and ponder that for quite a while with all that's happening in the world. November 17th, 12:35 p.m. Mercury retrograde at 1 degree 39 minutes of Sagittarius. Sextiles Pluto in Aquarius. Again, this is part of that cradle I spoke about. So, following the conjunction between Mercury and Mars, our minds get a visit from Pluto. Thus, we are driven internally to reflect on power dynamics, death, rebirth, and transformation. This is also an internal reflection and mental experience of how society is going through this deep transformative experience by unearthing the darkness of the underworld for all to see. Epstein files? And who is named in them? We shall see. In addition, on November 17th at 12:55 a.m., the Sun at 25 degrees, 15 minutes of Scorpio trines Saturn, again involved in the grand water trine and several of the kites. This is the other side of the coin where the social environment, its structures, rules, obligations, restrictions with regard to karma and ancestral awareness comes into play with this grand water trine of social emotional awakening that is taking place. November 18th, 3:41 a.m., Venus trine North Node. This is involved in one of the wedges. As the feminine explores the depths of our psyche and society, we get to see how the feminine fits into the plan for our karmic evolution. Also, November 18th at 3:33 p.m., Sun conjunct Lilith at 26 degrees of Scorpio. And this is involved in the Grand Trine as well as several of the kites. This is an aspect of these grand water trines that brings in the empowerment of the feminine. She has been repressed, denied, relegated for far too long. It is time to bring our awareness to the liberation of the empowered feminine in society. The final breakthrough is occurring. Oh, this just feels like the liberation of the feminine so much. November 19th, 3:44 a.m., Mercury retrograde at 29 degrees, last degree of Scorpio, is opposite Uranus retrograde, 29 degrees of Taurus. This is involved in the wedge and also, I believe, one of the kites. While Mercury has been retrograde, it is interacting with all the major transpersonal planets and more, both Saturn and Mars as well. Basically, we are doing the deepest, most profound internal investigation into our spiritual worlds within, as well as how does our mind understand the masculine dynamic and structures of society. And here is where our simple personal minds get a reflective, polarized experience with the higher mind focused on the Earth's planetary electrical upgrade. New insights come through internally. November 19th. And just so you all know, when I'm reading these transit descriptions, these are things that I've written, and they try to capture the element and essence of the transit that is we're all experiencing. But again, these are my mind. These are my words and my mind trying to do that. So take it with a grain of salt, grab what speaks to you, and let the rest go. Also on November 19th, 4:21 a.m., Mercury retrograde 2929 of Scorpio, 29 degrees, 29 minutes. Trines Neptune retrograde at 2929 of Pisces. Excuse me. This is involved in the Grand Trine and the Wedge. This is when our inner mind shall investigate our own internal delusions. We shall come to understand how our own mysticism is in line with the greater spiritual delusions of society and the world. Also, November 19th, 10:46 p.m., we have a new moon at 28 degrees, 11 minutes of Scorpio. The inner child, our internal worlds, get to wake up to the depths of experience, exploring the power plays of the underworld that are present in our society. Okay, November 20th, 1:22 a.m., we have a Sun conjunct Mercury, a Kazimi. It's happening at Mercury is retrograde, and it's happening at 28 degrees, 18 minutes of Scorpio. So basically, our collective awareness meets the depths of the internal world of the mind and explores the understanding of our inner power and how it can be manipulated. Also, November 20th, 6:39 a.m., Uranus retrograde at 2929 of Taurus, sextiles Neptune retrograde at 2929 of Pisces. All these like transpersonal planets at like their last and first degrees of signs, and then all their interactions that are taking place. It's such a moment. This is a big one though. This Uranus and Neptune both in retrograde sextile. This is an internal experience of revolutionary change when it comes to our own inner mysticism and spirituality. The shifts that are occurring and the insight being had is happening more discreetly and personally inside rather than publicly being celebrated. Note that this aspect occurs very infrequently. It's hard for me to say. And when it does, it usually occurs in sets of 3 or more due to retrograde motion. For example, it occurred in 1966 through 68, first forming exactly in September of 66, then again in January 67, July 67, April 68, and May of 68. In 2025 to 2027, Uranus forms a sextile to Neptune in August of 2025. It did November 2025 now, and then July of 26, January of 27, and finally June of 27. So effectively, it's in play from August 2025 until June of 2027. The August 28th interaction exact was at 1 degree of Gemini. This second one at November 20th exact is at 29 degrees, 29 minutes of Taurus. Taurus and Pisces. And then July 15th of 2026, it'll be at 4 degrees of Gemini and 4 degrees of Aries. November 21st at 4:25 a.m., we have Sun at 29 degrees of Scorpio, opposite Uranus retrograde at 29 degrees of Taurus. Again, this is involved in the wedge and the kite. the culmination of our collective awareness, deep dive into the underworld opposes the insight we have gained from Uranus's last re-entry into Taurus, where it shall be retrograding to 27 degrees 27 minutes, as previously explained, until February 4th of 2026. Also on November 21st, 5:04 a.m., the Sun at the last degree of Scorpio trines Neptune retrograde at the last degree of Pisces. This is involved in that wedge as well as several of the kites. Although the Sun's opposition with Uranus is supported by Neptune in the wedge pattern, or our internal spiritual compass, finalizing its last visit into its home sign of Pisces. Lastly, no, wait, there is more. Oh my goodness. Also, November 21st, 5:37 a.m., Mercury retrograde is conjuncting Lilith in Scorpio. And we saw this part of the kite and part of the wedge. At the same time that the Sun is opposing Uranus, Mercury and Lilith are coming together right with the Sun, thus enlightening our minds about the internal understanding of the dark, repressed aspects of the feminine. Lastly, on November 21st at 5:36 p.m., the Sun enters Sagittarius. Our collective awareness leaves the deep, dark underworld to explore the heavens and reconcile the higher order of philosophy. Now we are focused on the journey of experience, specifically culture and travel and expansion, through expansion. November 22nd, 10:45 a.m., Mercury retrograde, trine Saturn. This is part of the Grand Trine, as well as kites, and might be one of the wedges as well. As Mercury continues to review the last 10 degrees of Scorpio, it joins into a grand water trine with Saturn and Jupiter. Basically, we get to better understand the social and emotional dynamics of our relationships. Also on November 22nd, 3:37 p.m., it's the exact link up of Mercury retrograde with Jupiter retrograde in the Grand Trine as well. November 23rd, 11:19 a.m., the Sun at 1 degree 45 minutes of Sagittarius sextiles Pluto, and this is involved in the cradle. As soon as the Sun transitions into a Sagittarius, wouldn't you know it, it interacts with Pluto at the 1st degree and a half of Aquarius, thus forming a cradle out of a wedge. Now Neptune and Pluto are supporting the opposition between the Sun and Uranus. I might have to fill up my water bottle while I'm on a recording. Also, November 23rd, 5:44 p.m., Mars, 14 degrees of Sagittarius, squares North Node, and this is that T-square. So squaring both the nodes, the collective masculine exploration of belief systems, culture, and philosophy is in conflict with the evolution of our karma. November 24th, 5:51 p.m., Mercury retrograde conjunct Venus, and our minds wake up to the depths and power of the feminine, which is in the process of deep transformation. November 26th, 8:31 p.m. Excuse me. Oh, I yawned. Time for a vagus nerve reset. This is the exact lineup of Venus trine Jupiter involved in the grand water trine and the kite. After Mercury retrograde intersects with Venus, our minds are focused on the feminine experience as planets of society. The social planets are supporting our internal emotional quotient as they are both retrograde. In addition, the Venus trine Saturn basically the same as we described above. Then November 27th, 7:51 p.m., Saturn goes direct, 2509 degrees of Pisces. Basically, as that grand water trine is happening, the same time Venus stations and goes direct after it's been in retrograde. So basically, we're applying the restrictions and structures to the external world regarding karma. It has been focused more internal, solidifying our structure since July 12th. Venus conjunct Lilith. This is involved in several of the kites. November 28th, 1:22 p.m. Here we are, realizing the experience of feminine repression and thus the deep transformational awakening of the feminine's power. This coming together of the repressed, empowered feminine is also the directive of the kite, informed by Jupiter and Saturn Neptune, while opposite Uranus. November 29th, we have Mercury going direct at 20 degrees 42 minutes of Scorpio. So Mercury refrains from its internal reversal journey since 6 degrees of Sagittarius, starting on November 9th, and it turns around at 20 degrees of Scorpio and cycles through those last 10 degrees of Scorpio for the third time, thus completing this deep dive discovery of manipulation and power struggles, basically uncovering the darkness of society. And boy, have we been doing it. November 29th, 6:48 p.m., Venus opposite Uranus retrograde in Taurus, Venus in Scorpio 29 degrees, Uranus in Taurus 29 degrees, and this was one of the kite formations. As the collective feminine finalizes her deep dive into the underworld, she becomes the focus of the insight gained through the upgrades happening on the planet. Jupiter, as well as Saturn with Neptune, are working with Uranus to upgrade Venus and Lilith. She is advancing with the help of social benefit, social structure, and mystical truth, as well as insightful change. November 30th at 12:47 a.m., it's the exact trine between Venus and Neptune that's also involved in that same kite and the grand trines. And then November 30th at 12:14 p.m., Venus enters Sagittarius. Following being the peak planet focus of the kite configuration, Venus steps out of the underworld Scorpio journey in order to soar to greater heights. Oh, I love it. It's time for her to rise like the comet or the phoenix. Phoenix rising, baby. All right. That is it for November. I don't include a lot of the moon transits, not necessarily all the sun transits. They just happen so fast, so readily that it's just almost like a daily or even more than daily occurrence. So try to focus on the bigger, more potent, profound aspects of what's happening in our society, in our world, our experience. We're all in this together. Have a lovely evening. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for playing as the world turns.